Today we're going to replace the right-hand Joy-Con rail connector on a Nintendo Switch OLED. In order to do that, you're going to need a small Phillips driver, tri-point screwdriver, and some sort of pry tool. So what we're going to do first is make sure that we don't have any game cards installed at the moment. Flip it over on the back, and if you have an SD card, I'd recommend that you take that out at this time as well. We're going to start with two tri-point screws here in the bottom corners. Go ahead and remove those. And we're going to switch over to our Phillips bit. At this point, we have two screws here on either side of the charge port that need to come out. And we'll have one more up here at the top. Once you got those out, we have on the left-hand Joy-Con rail, we're only going to take out this top screw. And in fact, I'll recommend you just take the top screws out on either side for now. And we will come back later on for the remaining two here. And that is just to keep things from flopping around while we take it apart. So if you flip up this back panel now, we're going to just kind of lift and pry. Good place to start is right over here on the edge. And you can just kind of lift up on that. And I would recommend you do it from the bottom first. And the reason is we want to go ahead and make sure that we release the top without putting any tension on the buttons. So you can just kind of lift up like this. If you find that it gets stuck here, you can pull down a bit in this middle section to lift it out. And then that should allow you to just slide the top half off. Now, as you can see, we've got a hole here that you should not be able to see through. This console happened to be missing something called the LED lampshade. So the empty hole you see at the top is where this little dot goes. There's only one way really that it'll fit in. And if you want your ambient light sensor or auto brightness to work, you need to make sure that you have this piece installed. Once you have the plastic back panel off, we have 10 silver screws that need to be removed. One of them is probably going to be hidden underneath a piece of tape right here. And then there's also going to be one that's hiding behind a wire. So this antenna wire right here needs to move just a little bit over to the left there so that you can get your screwdriver down inside. Make sure not to damage that wire. And if you happen to have an electric screwdriver, this is one of those situations where it comes in very handy. Now before you remove this panel, we have to unplug these two antenna wires, and then we not only have to peel this back a little bit, there's some adhesive underneath here, but this wire is also routed down inside of the frame. So I'm going to put this under the microscope so you can see how to get this wire out and to unplug these two antenna wires. Over here at the top right hand corner, you're going to get this wire out from underneath this tab down in here. And then you're going to pull it up, and then there's going to be another tab down here towards the bottom. You want to make sure you get out from underneath those. And for your antenna wire connectors, you're just going to very gently lift on the metal piece right here. And these should pop right off. Don't pull on the wire itself. And you might have to rock it back and forth a little bit, but that should come off, as well as this one right here. Once you've got all that disconnected, you should be able to go ahead and grab this panel and just lift it straight off. We're going to take a non-conductive tool and go right underneath our battery connector and lift it straight up, just like that. You can now remove your game card / SD card reader if you want to. There's a connector right here in the center, so I'd probably grab right there and just lift it straight out. If you need to replace that, that's all you have to do is plug one of those back in. And from here I am going to go back underneath the microscope again for this wire. This flex cable right here. You want to be very careful with this little gate. Zoom in a bit. So these are pretty fragile. You want to be gentle lift this up so that it's vertical to the motherboard, and from there you can slide out the flex cable. And now we just have our 2 remaining screws on the side rail. I'm going to flip this over because I am right-handed. It'll make it a little easier for me. So we're going to take out these 2 screws. You might want to hold the rail in place so it doesn't just fall out. And here's the tip. I would recommend you keep one of these screws on the screwdriver if possible. If your screwdriver is magnetized and you can keep it just like that, it'll make your life easier. When you take this rail off, grab the new one and set it in place, so that way you don't have to worry about threading your screw. It's already on the driver. Go ahead and get one of these back in, and then that way you can free up your hand in order to get the other screw. Alright, so we'll get this screw ready to go. Alright, let's get our new flex cable plugged in. This can be a little tricky. You might have to bend it this direction a little bit in order to get the angle correct. Make sure your gate's all the way open. As I flatten that down, you can see it slides right in. Make sure that's fully seated. Push this down and we can get the back panel back on. First, let's get our game card reader. Set this into position. Make sure that plugs in. And then we get our battery connected. At this point, I would recommend that you turn your switch on, test everything, make sure it's working properly before we continue. You won't, however, have much in the way of wireless connectivity because these antenna wires are not installed. Other than that, everything else should be working. Go ahead and make sure you get this wire back into that channel that goes over the top of the screw head. And this part can be a little tricky, but we are going to get this wire to go down inside behind this little tab into these 2 slots. And then there's another tab at the top. Like I said, it can be a little tricky. Once you get that inside, we can set this down and put our last screw in right there. And then we want to go ahead and make sure we get our antennas connected. These should push right on if you have them aligned straight. Do not force them. It's very easy to damage these if you put them in sideways and smash down on top of them. And if you end up with that gap, remember we can just kind of rotate this. That tab looks like it's a little bent. Alright, so we want to go underneath there, just like that. And from here we can get our rear panel back on. Alright, from here we're going to latch in the top end of the rear panel first, because we don't want our volume or power buttons to be knocked out of position. And once you get it latched in at the top, sometimes getting the edges in can be a little tricky if it's not aligned properly. So you might have to do some maneuvering here. Okay, we've got one side down. And this one has been particularly difficult for some reason. I've got the other side installed, but it does not want to go in, which is very strange. It's usually not that difficult. Alright, so that side just went in and popped out the other side. Not sure why this happens. But I suspect it has to do with this tab right here. Alright, so we've got both sides in. Now at the bottom, if you need to, you can maneuver. Number one, you might have to pull out on the center of the console a bit to get this to slide in underneath it. Also, you can move these little mesh pieces on the edges to get them to tuck in where they're supposed to go. Let's concentrate on this first. I'm going to tuck in the center, and then as you'll see here, we want to make sure that we get these little mesh pieces to go behind the edge like that. Same thing on this side. And this one kind of caught there on the edge, so let's make sure to tuck that inside. So we have a nice smooth seam. And I think we've got everything lined up here. So from this point, we will have our 2 tri-point screws down in the bottom corners. 2 Phillips screws at the top of each side rail. And we are ready to go. Where's my power button?